The air in the Blackwood family's opulent drawing room was so thick with avarice, it felt like trying to breathe underwater. With billionaire patriarch Andrew Blackwood now deceased, his relatives had descended like vultures clad in designer attire, each poised to tear apart his vast empire. There was Genevieve, his cunning widow, a woman whose beauty was as carefully constructed as her business deals. Michael, his arrogant, impatient son, already measuring himself for the throne. And Serafina, his spoiled, tempestuous daughter, whose every whim had always been law. And then, almost swallowed by the shadows at the back of the room, sat Ellie, a young woman in a plain, borrowed coat. She was so quiet, so unassuming, she was practically invisible. No one even knew her name or seemed to care. Each member of the Blackwood clan was waiting, breathlessly, to hear their own name called, to receive their inheritance. But the family lawyer, a dry, solemn figure, read only one name only for everything. In that single, shocking second, the invisible girl became the most dangerous person in the room, the unwitting wielder of unimaginable power. The day Andrew Blackwood was interred was a spectacle of calculated mourning. The sun, as if taking its cue from the somber occasion, hid its face, draping the expansive lawns of Raven's Nest estate in a cold, gray October light. The house itself, a hulking Gothic structure of gray stone and creeping black ivy, seemed to exhale a sigh of relief, as if finally freed from the oppressive presence of its master. Andrew Blackwood, a man who had ruled his family and his global corporation with the same iron fist, was finally gone, leaving behind a tangled web of ambition, resentment, and secrets. Inside, the family gathered in the grand library, a room designed not for reading, but for intimidation. Towering two-story walls of books, most of them untouched, flanked a cavernous fireplace where no fire burned, adding to the room's frigid atmosphere. The air was heavy, thick with the cloying scent of white lilies, the preferred flower of funerals, and the unmistakable aroma of old money, a scent as potent and suffocating as any perfume. At the head of the room, perched on a velvet chaise lounge like a queen on her throne, sat Genevieve Blackwood, the thrice-widowed matriarch. She was Andrew's third wife, a woman sculpted from ice and ambition, her platinum blonde hair pulled back in a flawless chignon. Her grief was a carefully crafted performance, a masterpiece of restraint, visible only in the single, perfect tear she dabbed at with a delicate lace handkerchief. Beside her, standing ramrod straight, was Michael Blackwood, the presumptive heir. He wore a $20,000 Seville row suit as if it were a suit of armor, his jaw tight, his eyes constantly flicking towards the antique clock on the mantelpiece. He wasn't mourning a father. He was impatiently awaiting his coronation. Pacing restlessly by the rain-lashed windows was Serafina Blackwood Crest, a whirlwind of fluttering silk and barely suppressed fury. "How long is this going to take?" she hissed to her husband Damien, a man whose spine seemed to have been surgically removed to make room for his wife's towering ambition. "I have a fitting at 4. This is just morbid." As if summoned by her impatience, the family lawyer, Mr. Alistair Finch, entered the room. He was a small, dry man, with the weary air of someone who had witnessed too many family dramas. He was the only person in the room who seemed genuinely somber, his face etched with a professional sorrow. He carried a single, worn leather briefcase, the weight of which seemed disproportionate to his slight frame. "If we are all present," Finch began, his voice a quiet, steady counterpoint to the room's ostentatious opulence. "We are," Michael snapped, his voice edged with impatience. "Get on with it." Finch adjusted his spectacles, his gaze sweeping over the assembled family. "There is one other." The Blackwoods turned as one, their predatory instincts piqued. For the first time, they truly noticed her. In a small, hard-backed chair by the door, dwarfed by a towering statue of a Roman god, sat a young woman. She couldn't have been more than 24. Her coat was a simple, threadbare wool, the kind you'd find in a thrift store. Her mousy brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her hands were clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. She looked like a field mouse that had accidentally wandered into a snake pit. Genevieve's eyes narrowed, her gaze as sharp and cold as shards of ice. And you are? The girl's voice was barely a whisper, as if she was afraid to break the oppressive silence. Ellie Vance. Mr. Finch sent me an invitation. Serafina let out a sound that was half laugh, half scoff. Vance? Are you from the kitchens? Did one of the staff die? She is not, Finch interrupted, his voice suddenly sharp and commanding, silencing Serafina with a single glare. Ms. Vance was specifically named by Mr. Blackwood as a required attendee. This simple statement sent a ripple of confusion, and then thinly veiled contempt, through the room. Michael stared at her, his mind running a quick, cold calculation. Was she a former assistant? A nurse? Perhaps even, he considered with a flicker of distaste, a mistress? He quickly dismissed the last possibility. She was far too plain. He categorized her as irrelevant and turned back to Finch, his voice dripping with condescension. A Leicester, my father had his eccentricities. No doubt he left this girl his old collection of stamps. Let's move on to the actual estate. Mr. Finch nodded grimly, his face betraying nothing of what he knew was coming. As you wish. He clicked open his briefcase, the sound echoing in the sudden, expectant silence. The room fell into a predatory quiet. The only sound was the rustle of thick, important paper as Finch began to unfold the will. Ellie Vance pressed herself further into the chair, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had absolutely no idea why she was there. Her grandfather, Thomas, had spoken of his father, Andrew Blackwood, only once, with a bitterness that had both shocked and scared her. Thomas had died in poverty, a life she was determined to avoid. Ellie had spent her life as a librarian, living paycheck to paycheck, deliberately invisible. She had only met Andrew Blackwood one time, a strange, brief encounter in her small-town library 6 months ago. He had watched her, asked her a few cryptic questions, and then left as abruptly as he had arrived. She'd thought nothing of it until the summons to this viper's nest. We will begin, Finch said, his voice cutting through the tension, with the minor bequests. The will began, as expected, with a series of grand gestures that were, for the Blackwoods, mere crumbs, insulting in their insignificance. To my wife, Genevieve Blackwood, Finch read, his voice devoid of emotion. I leave the Park Avenue penthouse and its contents, as well as the adjoining properties in the Hamptons and St. Bart's, to be maintained by the estate for her lifetime. Genevieve's lips thinned, the carefully constructed facade of grief momentarily cracking. For her lifetime, not willed to her outright. She couldn't sell them, couldn't convert them into liquid assets. A gilded cage, no more. She said nothing, but the knuckles gripping the chaise long turned white as bone. To my daughter, Serafina Blackwood Crest, Finch continued, seemingly oblivious to the rising tension. I leave her current trust fund to be doubled, and my full collection of Impressionist art, valued at approximately $40 million. Serafina brightened, then immediately frowned, her expression shifting from avarice to annoyance in a heartbeat. That's it? The art? What am I supposed to do with it? Sell it? It's a logistical nightmare. And to my son, Michael Blackwood. Michael leaned forward, his body tense, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. This was it. The keys to the kingdom, the culmination of a lifetime of striving. I leave my private watch collection, my vintage Aston Martin, and he cleared his throat, the sound amplified in the oppressive silence. A one-time final bequest of $50 million, tax-free. The silence in the room was no longer silence. It was a vacuum. It sucked the air, the warmth, the very light from the windows, leaving behind a chilling void. Michael's face, usually a mask of arrogant composure, began to twitch, a muscle spasming uncontrollably in his jaw. Leicester, read that again. A one-time final bequest of $50 million, Finch repeated, not looking up from the document. That's a rounding error. Michael hissed, his voice dangerously low, barely a whisper. That's an insult. Where is the company? Where are the controlling shares? Where is everything else? Genevieve sat bolt upright, her icy composure finally shattering. Alistair, stop this game. This is a preliminary will. Where is the real testament? This is the final, certified, and fully executed last will and testament of Andrew Blackwood. Signed 2 months prior to his death, Finch stated, his voice flat and unwavering. He was of sound mind and body, and the signing was witnessed by 3 independent partners at my firm. Then read the rest. Michael roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. Who gets the estate? Who gets Blackwood Global? Mr. Finch turned a page, his movements slow and deliberate, savoring the moment. He looked, for the first time, not at the enraged family, but at the small, terrified woman by the door, the woman who was about to inherit it all. Ellie Vance felt the shift in the atmosphere. Every eye in the room, cold, furious, and utterly bewildered, was now focused on her. She felt a wave of nausea wash over her, and she feared she was going to faint. As to the remainder of my estate, Finch read, his voice clear and projecting, filling the room with the weight of his words, which includes, but is not limited to, the Raven's Nest property and all its grounds, the portfolio of international real estate, all liquid and non-liquid assets not previously named, and my 51% controlling stake in Blackwood Global Corporation. He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in, the silence amplifying the shock. I bequeath it in its entirety to Ms. Ellie Vance. If a bomb had gone off, it would have been quieter. Serafina dropped her champagne flute, the sound of shattering glass echoing like a gunshot through the stunned silence. Damien, her usually passive husband, actually stumbled backward, his face ashen. Genevieve simply froze, her face a mask of utter, uncomprehending horror. Michael's reaction was the most terrifying of all. He didn't move. He just stared at Ellie, his face slowly turning a deep, dangerous crimson. He said 2 words, his voice a venomous whisper that cut through the silence like a shard of glass. Who are you? Ellie couldn't speak. Her vision was tunneling, and the room was spinning around her. She's a con artist. Serafina shrieked, finally finding her voice. A grifter. Father was sick. He was senile. She preyed on him. I'll have her arrested. Silence. Finch commanded, the sheer force of authority in his voice shocking the room into silence. Mr. Blackwood anticipated this reaction, and he left one final addendum, which I am instructed to play now. With a practiced movement, Finch reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small, sleek tablet. He touched the screen, and the voice of Andrew Blackwood, gravelly and full of command even in death, filled the room, silencing any further protests. But it wasn't just a voice. On the screen, a high-definition video began to play, projected onto a blank wall. Andrew Blackwood, looking frail but with his eyes as sharp as obsidian, stared out at them, his gaze unwavering. If you are watching this, he began, his voice resonating with a chilling familiarity. It means I am dead, and it means you are all predictably furious. The image of Andrew Blackwood on the wall was spectral, unsettling, and terrifyingly alive. He was sitting in this very library, in the high-backed leather chair that Michael now considered his own birthright. My family, Andrew's recorded voice boomed, each word a calculated blow. Genevieve, Serafina, Michael, for 20 years, you have viewed me as nothing but a vault, a machine for generating the wealth you so desperately crave, yet do not understand. He turned his gaze slightly, as if looking past the camera and directly into their souls. Genevieve, you thought I didn't know about your private investments with my money, or about your correspondence with my rival Henri Dubois. You are not a wife, you were a high-priced corporate spy. You get the houses, but not a drop of liquidity. Try paying for your couturier with marble floors. Genevieve's face was no longer ice. It was stone, impenetrable and unyielding. Serafina, Andrew continued, his voice laced with contempt. My daughter, you spent $300,000 last month on what you called a charity gala. My accountants discovered that 90% of that money went to the catering and your dress. You have all the glitter of a diamond and all its hardness. The art is yours, but you will find I have attached a clause. Can never be sold, only donated. Enjoy your pretty walls. Serafina let out a wounded gasp, as if she'd been physically struck. Finally, Andrew's gaze settled on the center of the room, right where Michael stood, radiating barely controlled rage. And Michael, my son, my heir, you thought I was an old fool. You thought I didn't see your Project Hyperion. You didn't just fail, Michael. You leveraged the company's pension fund to cover your disastrous gambles in the Singapore market. You didn't just lose money. You stole from my employees. You are rash, you are arrogant, and you are, above all, a fool. $50 million is a severance package. Get out of my company. Michael was shaking, his hands balled into fists, his knuckles white. He's lying. The old bastard is lying. He is not, Finch said quietly, his voice firm. The audit I performed confirmed the Hyperion losses. You concealed them. Your father rectified them. Quietly. The video continued, Andrew holding up a hand, silencing any further interruptions. But a legacy must continue. The Blackwood name must mean something more than avarice. Which brings me to Ellie. Ellie flinched as her name was spoken by the dead man, her breath catching in her throat. You will not know her, Andrew said, his voice softening slightly. Decades ago I had a son. My firstborn, Thomas. He was not like me. He was kind and gentle and weak. He wanted to be a poet, not a predator. I disowned him, cast him out. I told him he was no longer a Blackwood. Andrew's iron expression faltered just for a second, a flicker of regret crossing his face. It was the single greatest mistake of my life. Thomas died as he lived, poorly. But he had a child, a granddaughter, a girl who inherited his kindness, but also, I discovered, a spine of steel I never knew he had. She works in a library. She supports herself. She has never asked anyone for a thing. She is Ellie Vance. He was looking right at her now, his gaze piercing through the screen. Ellie, you are my blood. The only blood in that room I am not ashamed of. You are the last true Blackwood. And so I give you everything. Ellie was weeping silently, her hands clasped over her mouth, trying to stifle the sobs that threatened to overwhelm her. Grandfather. But Andrew's voice hardened, snapping her back to reality. I am not a sentimentalist. This is not a gift. It is a test. Finch paused the video and looked back at his papers, his expression grave. Herein lies the stipulation. The Blackwood family, shattered and enraged, snapped back to attention, a flicker of hope igniting in their eyes. A chance, however slim, to regain control. To fully inherit, Finch read, his voice regaining its previous authority. Ellie Vance must comply with 2 conditions for a period of exactly 1 year. First, she must assume the role of CEO of Blackwood Global, and the company must maintain or exceed its current profitability at the end of the fiscal year. Michael let out a sharp, cruel laugh, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. She's a librarian. She'll be bankrupt in a month. And the second condition, Finch continued, his voice heavy with implication. She must, for the duration of that year, reside full-time at the Raven's Nest estate. Ellie's head shot up, her eyes wide with disbelief and a dawning sense of dread. Should she fail either condition, Finch finished, his voice resonating with finality. If the company loses money, or if she leaves the estate for more than 24 hours, the entire inheritance, including the bequests to Genevieve, Serafina, and Michael, will be immediately liquidated and donated in full to the Andrew Blackwood Foundation for, as he puts it, the preservation of endangered reptiles. The implication was horrific, a chillingly effective form of blackmail from beyond the grave. They were trapped. Ellie was trapped with them, and they were trapped with her. If they drove her out, they would lose everything. If she failed, they would lose everything. Andrew Blackwood, from beyond the grave, had just locked his family in a cage with the mouse who had just been given all the cheese. The video on the wall clicked back on. Andrew smiling. A thin, cold smile that sent a shiver down Ellie's spine. Checkmate, my dears. Now play nice. The screen went black, leaving the room plunged into an almost unbearable tension. For a full 30 seconds, the only sound was the howling of the wind outside, a mournful dirge that seemed to mirror the despair in the room. Then, Serafina launched herself, not at Ellie, but at the tablet in Mr. Finch's hand, shrieking with unhinged fury. You faked it. That's not him. It's a deep fake. Damien, her husband, pulled her back, his face pale with fear and a desperate attempt at maintaining control. Sarah, darling, calm down. Let's think. Think? Think? Michael roared, his face purple with rage, his composure completely shattered. He advanced, not on Finch, but on Ellie, his eyes burning with a barely suppressed violence. He was a big man, his presence towering and intimidating, and for the first time, Ellie realized she was in physical danger. She shrank back in her chair, but the high back of the chair was behind her, trapping her. There was nowhere to go. You, he seethed, jabbing a finger so close to her face that she could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. You little nobody. You think you can just walk in here? This is my house. This is my company. Michael, stop, Genevieve commanded, her voice like a whip crack, cutting through his rage. He paused, momentarily subdued by her authority. She rose from the chaise longue, a vision of cold fury, and walked slowly toward Ellie, circling her like a shark assessing its prey. Mr. Finch, Genevieve said, her voice lethally sweet, the calm before the storm. This is, of course, a travesty, a clear case of undue influence. My husband was gravely ill, on a cocktail of medications. This creature, she gestured dismissively at Ellie, clearly manipulated him. I only met him once, Ellie whispered, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to remain calm. At the library. It was 6 months ago, just for a few minutes. A likely story, Serafina cried, her voice shrill with accusation. She's been plotting this for years. She's probably a bastard child of his. A final, disgusting secret. She is his legal granddaughter, Miss Blackwood Crest. The paternity test and revised line of succession are filed with the court, Finch said tiredly, as if he'd had this argument 1,000 times before. Genevieve ignored him, focusing her attention solely on Ellie. She bent down, her face inches from Ellie's, her gaze unwavering and intense. Her perfume was overwhelming, a clawing, expensive scent that filled Ellie's nostrils and threatened to suffocate her. Listen to me, girl. You have 2 options. You can sign a document right now, rejecting the inheritance, for which we will give you, say, $1 million, enough for you to disappear and live comfortably for the rest of your pathetic little life. And if I don't? Ellie managed, her heart feeling like it would burst from her chest. If you don't, Michael snarled, looming over her, his voice a menacing growl. We will drag your name through every gutter in this country. We will find every skeleton in your pathetic little closet. We will prove in court that you are insane or incompetent or a fraud. We will tie this estate up in litigation for so long that, by the time it's over, you'll be as old as he was. You will not see 1 penny. You will be destroyed. The threat hung in the air, absolute and suffocating. Ellie looked at their faces, each contorted with a mixture of rage, spite, and cold calculation. Michael pulsing with barely contained rage, Serafina vibrating with venomous spite, and Genevieve, a mask of aristocratic hate. This was her family. She thought of her grandfather, Thomas, living in a 1-bedroom apartment, dying of a preventable illness because he couldn't afford better care. She thought of her own life, a quiet existence of overdue bills and small, lonely dreams. Andrew Blackwood hadn't just given her a fortune. He had given her a sword, a weapon to fight back against a world that had always seemed stacked against her. Her terror, a cold, flooding ocean, began to recede, replaced by something else, something unexpected. In its place, something else flickered, a spark of defiance, a cold, hard anger she never knew she possessed. The Blackwood anger, dormant for a generation, had finally been awakened. She stood up, her movements deliberate, despite the tremor in her hands. She was not tall, but the simple act of rising to her feet made them all take an involuntary step back, as if sensing a shift in the power dynamic. She was no longer the mouse. She looked directly into Genevieve's cold blue eyes, her own gaze unwavering. No, Ellie said, her voice quiet but surprisingly firm, and, most importantly, it did not shake. I will not be signing anything. She then turned to Mr. Finch, her eyes locking with his. Mr. Finch, you are the executor. I accept the terms of the will. Please have the staff prepare a room for me. I assume, she said, her gaze sweeping over the grand staircase. A hint of steel entering her voice, that I am now the lady of this house. You may all stay as per the stipulation, but make no mistake, you are here as my guests. The sheer audacity of the statement stunned them into silence. Ellie Vance, the invisible librarian, picked up her single small purse, walked past the fuming, apoplectic family, and ascended the grand staircase of Raven's Nest, not knowing that she had just declared a war she was utterly unprepared to fight. A war against a family who had spent their entire lives honing the art of ruthless acquisition. The first 24 hours were a campaign of psychological warfare, a subtle but relentless assault designed to undermine her confidence and drive her out. The room the staff prepared for Ellie was, of course, the smallest in the guest wing, a cold, drafty space with a view of the gloomy courtyard. The fireplace was stubbornly unfixable, emitting more smoke than heat. When she requested tea, it arrived an hour later, lukewarm and bitter. The staff, fiercely loyal to Genevieve and Michael, looked right through her, as if she were a ghost. They didn't overtly disobey her orders, but they subtly delayed, misunderstood, forgot. Genevieve, Michael, and Serafina had gathered in the formal dining room for dinner, their voices loud, their laughter sharp and cruel, deliberately amplified to reach Ellie's ears. She was not invited, of course. She ate a stale sandwich she found in the cavernous kitchen, alone in her cold, inhospitable room. She didn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the rain lash against the glass, the storm mirroring the turmoil within her. And for the first time she truly understood the old man, her grandfather. He hadn't just given her an inheritance. He had given her a test of survival, a brutal initiation into the world of the Blackwoods. The next morning, she dressed in her only good outfit, a simple black skirt and a crisp white blouse, her version of armor. She walked to the garage, a showroom of luxury cars, each one a testament to the Blackwood family's wealth and extravagance. She found Andrew's practical car, a modest for him, black Bentley, located the keys, and drove herself to the headquarters of Blackwood Global, a sleek, imposing structure in the heart of the financial district. The building was a spear of black glass piercing the sky, a monument to ambition and power. When she walked in, the security guard, a burly man with a bored expression, tried to direct her to the temp agency entrance, assuming she was there to apply for a clerical position. I'm here to see. Well, I'm Ellie Vance. The name meant nothing to him. He checked his clipboard, his brow furrowed. I'm the new CEO. The guard's expression of disbelief was almost comical. He stared at her for a long moment, then let out a snort of laughter before reaching for the phone. He made a call, relaying the information in a low, incredulous voice. A moment later, a man came striding through the lobby, his steps purposeful, his demeanor radiating an aura of controlled power. He was slick, handsome, and radiated an aura of untrustworthy charm. Miss Vance? James Thorne, Chief Financial Officer. He shook her hand, his grip too firm, his smile too wide, too practiced. He was Michael's man. She knew it instantly, a gut feeling that resonated with her newfound instincts for survival. We were all so surprised to hear of Mr. Blackwood's creative final arrangements, James said, his voice smooth and oily as he led her towards the executive elevator. Michael has spoken so highly of you. Liar, she thought, the word echoing silently in her mind. He led her to the top floor, the exclusive domain of the CEO. The office was the size of her entire apartment, a vast, opulent space that reeked of wealth and privilege. A wall of glass overlooked the city, providing a panoramic view of the concrete jungle that Blackwood Global dominated. It was intimidating, sterile, and overwhelmingly masculine, a space designed to impress and intimidate. It's a lot to take in, James said, leaning casually against the massive desk, his posture betraying a subtle air of condescension. The market's volatile. We have the Hyperion merger finalization, very complex stuff. But don't you worry. Michael and I have it all in hand. You just acclimate, take some time. We'll handle the day-to-day. He was patronizing her, subtly trying to undermine her authority, setting her up to be a figurehead, a prisoner in the corner office. Thank you. James, Ellie said, her voice mild but firm, betraying none of the turmoil she felt inside. But I'd like to see the financials, all of them, for the last 2 quarters and the Hyperion files and the reports on my father's failed projects. James's smile tightened, the mask of charm momentarily slipping. Miss Vance, those are highly complex documents. Perhaps we can have a presentation summarized for you. Now, please, she said, her voice hardening, leaving no room for argument. And I'll also need a new executive assistant. I noticed the one outside is Michael's. James's mask slipped completely, revealing a flicker of annoyance and frustration. That's not really. I am the CEO. That is how this works, isn't it? He stared at her, reassessing her. His eyes narrowed with a newfound respect. This was not the timid girl he'd been told about. This was someone who was willing to fight for her position. Someone who wouldn't be easily manipulated. So of course, I'll see to it. He left, his steps less confident than before, leaving Ellie alone in the vast, silent office. She sank into the massive leather chair, the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. It was too big for her, overwhelming, and she felt like a child playing dress-up. What am I doing? She whispered to herself, her voice barely audible in the cavernous room. I'm a librarian. I catalog books. I don't run a multi-billion-dollar corporation. A soft knock came at the door, interrupting her self-doubt. An older woman with a severe bun of gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes entered, carrying a stack of files. You're not James, Ellie said, stating the obvious. No, ma'am. I'm not. The woman's voice was crisp and professional, her demeanor radiating an air of quiet competence. My name is Beat. A wonderful idea, Ellie responded, a genuine smile gracing her lips. And I'm so glad I can count on your support to help me navigate these intricate family traditions. In that instant, she deftly shifted the weight of the looming ball, making it Genevieve's problem as much as her own. The widow's smile, however, remained brittle, a thin veneer over something less pleasant. But the true battlefield lay elsewhere, within the sterile walls of Blackwood Global. Michael, now barred from the building, was a spectral presence, pulling strings through his chosen puppet, James Thorne. The Project Hyperion merger was the weapon of choice. It's a digital media acquisition, James explained to the assembled board, his voice dripping with practiced confidence. The other members, men who had known Michael since their days at exclusive prep schools, regarded Ellie with undisguised condescension. Andrew, he paused the deal. He had cold feet, but the numbers are undeniably solid. We need to sign by Friday, or the deal expires. It's a monumental win for us. Ellie eyed the prospectus. It was a blizzard of corporate buzzwords. Synergy, disruption, vertical integration. She didn't fully grasp the jargon, but she understood the language of numbers. And the numbers she was seeing screamed a warning. They're projecting 200% growth in a saturated market, Ellie stated, her voice barely a whisper. How is that even possible? James emitted a dismissive laugh, sharp and condescending. It's a new tech paradigm, Ellie. You wouldn't be expected to understand the algorithms. We just need your signature. It's a mere formality. I won't sign what I don't understand, Ellie retorted, a newfound steel in her voice. The boardroom fell into an uneasy silence. Ms. Vance, Mr. Sterling, one of the elder statesmen of the board, finally spoke. This deal is Michael's brainchild, a brilliant play, strategically sound. To hesitate now would project an image of weakness, uncertainty. The markets are watching, Ms. Vance. They are watching you. If you kill this, our stock will plummet, and you will be in violation of the profitability clause. You'll lose everything. It was a flawlessly constructed trap. Sign, and she was a puppet dancing to Michael's tune. Refuse, and she was deemed incompetent, a threat to the very foundation of Blackwood Global. That night, she confided in Mrs. Davies, her voice laced with frustration. They're boxing me in, Beatrix. I can't move without triggering something. Then it's time you opened your grandfather's box, Mrs. Davies replied, a glint of anticipation in her eyes. He always had a solution, didn't he? The private study was tucked away in the oldest, most secluded wing of Raven's Nest. The key slid into the lock with a smooth, well-oiled click. The room was a stark contrast to the rest of the house, a sanctuary of masculine energy. It was small, intimate, and filled with the comforting aromas of aged tobacco and rich leather. And instead of books, the walls were lined, floor to ceiling, with meticulously labeled black leather-bound ledgers. "He was old-fashioned, your grandfather," Mrs. Davies explained. "He kept 2 sets of books, the ones he presented to the board, and the ones he kept for himself. The truth, unvarnished." For 2 days, Ellie and Mrs. Davies worked tirelessly, fueled by coffee and adrenaline. Ellie, the librarian, the archivist, was in her element, meticulously cross-referencing the digital files from James with the handwritten notes in Andrew's ledgers. The neat, organized rows of numbers and annotations became a roadmap, leading them deeper into the labyrinth. On the 3rd night, just as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, Ellie found it. "My God," Ellie whispered, her hand flying to her mouth in disbelief. "What is it, dear?" "Project Hyperion," she said, her voice trembling. "James said Andrew paused it." "That's a lie. He killed it." She pointed to a specific line item in the ledger. "The company we're acquiring. It's a shell. It has no real assets. It's just a mountain of debt, cleverly disguised by offshore accounts." "But why?" Mrs. Davies asked, her brow furrowed. "Why would Michael and James push a deal that loses money?" Ellie's blood ran cold as she traced the complex web of ownership, the intricate flow of funds. The shell company, the debt. It wasn't random debt. She meticulously cross-referenced the account numbers with Andrew's handwritten notes. "It's not a merger," Ellie declared, her voice shaking with a mixture of rage and comprehension. "It's a bailout, Beatrix. Michael, he didn't just lose money on some bad gamble. He's still hemorrhaging money. He's been covering it up using shell corporations and shady accounting. He's trying to use Blackwood Global's money to buy his own toxic debt, to make the company absorb his personal catastrophe. If she signed, Blackwood Global would be saddled with a $500 million loss. The stock would plummet. She would be ousted, her inheritance nullified. And in the ensuing chaos, Michael would petition the board to be reinstated, the savior returning to save the company he had just engineered to destroy. He's not just trying to make me fail, Ellie realized, the full weight of Michael's plan crashing down on her. He's trying to burn the whole empire down, just so he can rule over the ashes. The charity ball. It was the night. The grand hall of Raven's Nest was ablaze with light, a dazzling spectacle of wealth and privilege. A live orchestra filled the air with elegant melodies. Hundreds of New York's elite, dripping in jewels and draped in silks, glided through the rooms, champagne flutes in hand. Genevieve and Serafina were in their element, basking in the attention, graciously accepting compliments on their exquisite home. They had subtly undermined Ellie's earlier attempts to manage the event, then swooped in at the last minute to save the day, reinforcing the narrative of Ellie as the clueless, incompetent newcomer. Ellie herself felt a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. She wore a simple, elegant navy blue dress that Mrs. Davies had helped her select, but beneath the fabric, she felt like an imposter, a fraud. "They're all watching me," Ellie whispered to Mrs. Davies, who was meticulously managing the event checklist. "Of course they are, dear," Mrs. Davies said, her voice surprisingly firm. "You're the most powerful person in this room now, Miss Vance. Stand up straight. Your grandfather hated slouching. Show them who you are." Just then, James Thorne arrived, as slick and polished as ever. And on his arm, radiating arrogance, was Michael Blackwood. "What is he doing here?" Ellie hissed, her voice laced with alarm. "It's a family event, Ellie," Genevieve said smoothly, appearing at her side as if summoned. "He's still a Blackwood. Do not make a scene, darling. It's unbecoming." The threat was implicit. Asterisk, everyone is watching. Michael smirked at her, his eyes filled with malice. "Enjoying the party, CEO?" he purred, the title dripping with sarcasm. "Big day tomorrow. The Hyperion signing. 10 a.m. sharp." Don't be late. He was cornering her, deliberately trying to provoke a reaction, hoping she would unravel in front of the assembled guests. I'll be there, Michael, Ellie replied, her voice as smooth and cold as ice. I'm looking forward to it. She turned and walked away, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had the proof of Michael's fraud, carefully documented in Andrew's ledgers, but it was still just her word against James's, her testimony against the established power structure. The board was fiercely loyal to Michael. They would readily dismiss her as a hysterical, paranoid girl. They would side with James, protecting their own interests. She needed more, something irrefutable. She retreated to the sanctuary of the library, the noise of the party a distant, muffled roar. She was searching for something. She wasn't entirely sure what. A weapon, a key, a lifeline. She went back to Andrew's private study, drawn by an unseen force. The ledgers were still open on the desk. She picked up the last one, the one from the month he died. His handwriting, usually so strong and confident, was now shaky and uneven. The entries were mostly about Michael, filled with a growing sense of despair. Asterisk entry. October 10th. Michael confirmed the Hyperion losses. He begged, he threatened. He doesn't understand. He's not just a fool, he's a criminal. He has betrayed the name. Asterisk entry October 12th. Spoke to Alistair Finch. Changed the will. It must be Ellie. She is the only one. She has Thomas's heart, but I see my fire in her eyes. She will need it. Then the final entry. The day before his fatal heart attack. Asterisk entry. October 14th. He knows what I've done. He knows about the will. Genevieve. She told him she's been working with him all along. My rival, my wife. She gave him the new medication. My regular pills. They're gone. This new, it makes me dizzy. My chest, it's tight. If something happens. Ellie stopped breathing, her mind reeling. It wasn't just corporate sabotage. It wasn't just a disinheritance. It was murder. She tore the page from the ledger, her hands trembling with a mixture of fear and righteous fury. She ran from the room, back toward the party, the truth burning in her like a wildfire. She found Mrs. Davies by the grand staircase. "Call Mr. Finch," she said, her voice urgent and strained. "Tell him to get here now. And call the police. Tell them I have evidence regarding the death of Andrew Blackwood." Mrs. Davies's face went white, but she didn't question Ellie's sanity. She simply nodded, her eyes filled with understanding and a steely resolve. She moved swiftly toward a private phone line. Ellie turned and faced the ballroom. The music was swelling, reaching a crescendo. Michael and Genevieve were standing together, near the fireplace, holding court, laughing. They looked powerful, untouchable. Ellie walked deliberately toward the orchestra conductor, her gaze unwavering. "Stop," she commanded. The conductor, startled by the sudden interruption, hesitated for a moment, then reluctantly obeyed. The music died with a discordant squeal of violins. 1,000 pairs of eyes turned toward her, filled with curiosity and apprehension. "Ellie, what is the meaning of this?" Genevieve hissed, her forced smile now crumbling at the edges. Ellie continued to walk, her footsteps echoing across the marble floor. She reached the small microphone on the lectern, intended for making welcome speeches. "Good evening, everyone." Ellie's voice, amplified by the microphone, boomed through the vast hall, silencing the murmurs of the crowd. "Thank you all for coming. You all knew Andrew Blackwood. You knew him as a titan of industry, a brilliant, if ruthless, man." She looked directly at Michael and Genevieve, her eyes blazing with anger. "But you didn't know the truth. You're here tonight to celebrate his legacy, but I'm here to tell you how it really ended." "Ellie, stop this nonsense at once," Michael shouted, his face darkening with fury. He started to move toward her, his fists clenched. "Stay where you are," Ellie's voice cracked like a whip, cutting through the tension in the room. "Or I will have security remove you. My security." He stopped, momentarily stunned by the authority in her voice. The room was utterly silent, every eye fixed on the unfolding drama. "You all know me as the surprise heir," Ellie continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. "The family has been painting me as a fool, an incompetent librarian. They've been waiting for me to fail." She held up the ledger page, the incriminating words visible to those in the front rows. "They've been counting on it. In fact, right now, James Thorne and Michael Blackwood are trying to force me to sign a deal called Project Hyperion. A deal that would use company funds to cover up Mr. Michael Blackwood's personal criminal fraud, to the tune of $500 million. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. James Thorne, standing near the doorway, began to sweat profusely, his carefully constructed facade crumbling. "But that's not the real secret," Ellie said, her voice breaking with emotion, her gaze fixed on Genevieve. "I wondered why Andrew would give me everything, why he would do something so drastic. I thought it was because they were greedy. I thought it was because they were incompetent." She locked eyes with Genevieve, who hadn't moved an inch. Her face was now a mask of pure, unadulterated hate. "I was wrong. It was because he was afraid. He knew they weren't just capable of theft. He knew they were capable of murder." The ballroom exploded in a roar of shock and disbelief. "You insane little bitch," Serafina shrieked, her voice shrill and hysterical. "It's a forgery. She's lying." "Am I?" Ellie's voice cut through the din, silencing the chaos. "I have here Andrew Blackwood's private journal, his last entry, written the day before he died. He details how his medication was lost, how his wife Genevieve, in league with his son Michael, gave him new pills. He wrote, 'My chest. It's tight.' He knew. He knew they were killing him." At that exact moment, the main doors of the ballroom burst open. Mr. Finch entered, flanked by 2 uniformed police officers and 2 detectives in plain clothes. The blood drained from Genevieve's face, her carefully applied makeup unable to conceal the sudden pallor of her skin. Michael turned and ran, desperately trying to escape the trap that had so suddenly sprung around him. "Stop him!" Ellie shouted, pointing a trembling finger. One of the detectives tackled Michael before he could reach the hall, sending him sprawling to the ground. Genevieve stood frozen, her champagne glass still clutched tightly in her hand, as the second detective approached her. "Mrs. Genevieve Blackwood, Mr. Michael Blackwood," the detective said, his voice hard and unwavering. "You're under arrest on suspicion of conspiracy, fraud, and the murder of Andrew Blackwood." As they cuffed a roaring Michael and a completely catatonic Genevieve, the entire party watched in horrified fascination. Serafina fainted, collapsing onto the floor in a heap of silk and shame. Ellie Vance stood alone in the center of the room, shaking but resolute, holding the piece of paper that had saved her life and avenged her grandfather. The invisible girl was finally the only one left standing. The aftermath was a hurricane of legal proceedings, media frenzy, and societal upheaval. The arrests at the charity ball became the biggest society and financial scandal of the decade. The Blackwood name was plastered across every tabloid and news channel, no longer as a symbol of wealth and power, but as a monument to dark Gothic tragedy. The trial was swift and merciless. The evidence was overwhelming. Andrew's journal, combined with a detailed toxicology report from the exhumation of his body, proved beyond a doubt that he had been given fatal doses of a heart medication he was not prescribed. The Hyperion fraud served as the motive, the desperate attempt to conceal Michael's financial ruin. The staff, no longer bound by loyalty to a disgraced mistress, provided damning testimony about Genevieve and Michael's secret meetings, the new doctor who had visited Raven's Nest, the hushed arguments they had overheard behind closed doors. James Thorne, in a desperate bid for a lesser sentence, confessed everything about the financial sabotage, further sealing their fate. Michael Blackwood was found guilty of first-degree murder and 9 counts of financial fraud. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole, his arrogance finally extinguished by the cold reality of his crimes. Genevieve Blackwood, convicted of conspiracy to commit murder, received a sentence of 25 years. Serafina, implicated in the fraud but not the murder, lost everything. The art collection, once a symbol of her exquisite taste, was seized to pay the staggering fines and restitution. Her husband, Damien, sensing a sinking ship, filed for divorce within a week, leaving her with nothing but a tarnished name she could no longer bear. The stipulation of the will, the one-year clause that had hung over Ellie's head like a sword, was declared fulfilled by a judge's order. Ellie had exposed the rot at the heart of the Blackwood Empire, saved the company from ruin, and brought the perpetrators to justice. The inheritance was hers, free and clear. For a month, Ellie remained within the walls of Raven's Nest, the weight of her newfound power and responsibility pressing down on her. The house was no longer a prison, but a fortress, a sanctuary from the storm raging outside. It was quiet, eerily so. The silence was deafening, broken only by the murmur of Mrs. Davies's voice as she managed the skeletal staff. Ellie would wander the halls, touching the things her grandfather had owned, trying to connect with a legacy she had never fully understood. She sat for hours in his study, surrounded by the silent ledgers, the remnants of his meticulously documented life. She had won. At 25, she was one of the richest and most powerful women in the world. And yet, she had never felt more alone. She had avenged a family she had never truly known, only to find herself the sole survivor of a name she wasn't sure she even wanted. The press was relentless, a pack of wolves circling outside the gates. Was she a hero? Was she a victim? Was she a cold-blooded usurper who had destroyed her own family? The headlines screamed conflicting narratives, each more sensational than the last. One evening, Mrs. Davies found her in the library, staring blankly into the cold fireplace, her face etched with exhaustion and uncertainty. "You look like him, you know," Mrs. Davies said quietly, breaking the silence. "Like my father?" Ellie asked, her voice flat. "No, like Andrew. When he was lost in thought, he would stare at that fireplace for hours, his mind churning, calculating, strategizing. He was a monster, too, wasn't he? He disowned his son. He ruined lives. He treated his family like game pieces, pawns to be sacrificed for his own ambition. Am I becoming him?" "You are not him," Mrs. Davies said with a fierceness that surprised Ellie. He saw the world as a battlefield, a constant struggle for dominance. He saw his family as soldiers or traitors, instruments to be used and discarded. You saw the truth, Miss Vance. You sought justice, not just power. You are something else entirely." Mrs. Davies handed her a cup of tea, the warmth seeping into her cold hands. "Your grandfather Thomas was kind, a gentle soul. Your great-grandfather Andrew was strong, ruthless in his pursuit of his goals. You, Miss Vance, are the first Blackwood to be both. The question is, what are you going to do with it? What kind of legacy will you leave behind?" Ellie looked down at her hands, the hands of a librarian, the hands that had toppled an empire. She had a choice to make, a decision that would define the rest of her life. She could sell it all, liquidate the company, donate the money, and disappear back into her old, invisible life, shedding the weight of the Blackwood name. Or she could stay, rebuild, create something new, something that would honor the best of her family's legacy while forging her own path. The possibilities stretched before her, daunting and exhilarating. The future was unwritten, and for the first time in her life, Ellie Vance held the pen. Her words were a chime, clear and cold, each syllable a pronouncement of guilt. A vice tightened around my chest, and a chill, deeper than the ballroom's air conditioning, settled over me. It was as if the universe itself had been waiting for that precise moment, for the incantation of blame, because then, the heavy oak doors at the ballroom's entrance were flung open with violent force. Mr. Finch stood framed in the doorway, a tableau of authority. On either side of him stood 2 state troopers, their uniforms crisp and faces impassive. Flanking them were 2 men in dark suits, detectives whose grim expressions telegraphed the gravity of the situation. The color vanished from Genevieve's face, leaving her skin ashen. Michael, with a guttural cry, whirled and fled, shoving a hapless waiter scattering canapes and shattering champagne glasses. His desperate sprint aimed at the terrace doors. "Stop him!" Ellie's voice cut through the stunned silence, sharp as shattered glass. One of the detectives, with a speed that belied his bulky frame, intercepted Michael before he could reach the glass doors. The impact sent Michael crashing into a table laden with delicate champagne flutes, sending them cascading to the floor in a shower of glittering shards and spilled liquor. Genevieve remained rooted to the spot, her champagne glass still clutched in her hand, a frozen monument to disbelief and terror. The second detective approached her with a deliberate, inexorable stride. "Mrs. Genevieve Blackwood." His voice, though polite, held the weight of undeniable authority. "Mr. Michael Blackwood," the first detective announced, his voice like granite as he hauled the struggling, ranting Michael to his feet. "You're under arrest on suspicion of conspiracy, financial fraud, and the murder of Andrew Blackwood." As they cuffed Michael, his screams echoing through the suddenly silent ballroom, and as Genevieve, utterly unresponsive, was led away, the assembled guests watched in horrified fascination. The popping flashes of cameras erupted as reporters, who had been discreetly covering the high society event, seized their moment. Serafina, with a long, drawn-out wail like a wounded animal, collapsed onto the cool marble floor in a dead faint, her world crumbling around her. Elevin stood alone in the center of the room, the epicenter of the devastation, her hands trembling, the damning ledger page clutched tightly in her grasp. She had, in that moment, orchestrated the downfall of the Blackwood family, all in a desperate attempt to salvage the Blackwood name. The invisible girl, the overlooked observer, was the only one left standing amidst the ruins. She was the mouse who had unexpectedly inherited the viper's nest. Ellie Vance had walked into that opulent ballroom with nothing but a name, a tenuous connection to a legacy she barely understood. She walked out having exposed the rot at its core, only to discover that the inheritance she had claimed was poisoned, tainted by greed and deceit. She had been underestimated at every turn, dismissed as insignificant. She was pushed, she was sabotaged, she was seen as an easy mark. But those who mistook her silence for weakness, who interpreted her kindness as stupidity, were the ones who ultimately found themselves in ruins, their ambitions reduced to ashes. This is a story about legacy, about the corrosive power of unchecked greed, and about the quiet, indomitable strength that resides within those who are consistently overlooked and underestimated. How many Ellies are out there, hidden in plain sight, invisible until their moment to act arrives? If you were moved by Ellie's story, if you believe that true strength lies not in being the loudest voice in the room, but in the unwavering pursuit of justice, then please help our channel grow. Like this video, share it with someone who appreciates a tale of justice served, even when it's served cold. And most importantly, subscribe and hit the notification bell. We have countless more stories waiting to be told, and we can't bring them to you without your support. Thank you for listening, for watching, and for believing in the power of untold stories.